Thank you again for joining us for Diaspora Engagement in the MENA region, a webinar hosted by IDEA, the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, with our special partners for today, UNU-MERIT, which is the United Nations University Maastricht Economic and Social Research Institute on Innovation and Technology, which is based in the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Youssefnejad Gallagher, and I'm the Program Officer for IDEA. This webinar is part of IDEA's Capacity Development Training Series, and we're excited to partner with such a stellar institution like UNU-MERIT. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Nora Jasmin Ragab, a PhD Fellow at UNU-MERIT and the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance. She holds a Master's in Public Policy and Human Development with a specialization in Migration Studies. Her main research and interest lies in the area of migration and development with a special focus on diaspora engagement. She has conducted studies on the Syrian and Tunisian diaspora in Germany, looking, among other things, on how the Arab Spring influenced the diaspora consciousness, and she's here to share with us today some of that research. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nora. Nora, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for inviting me to give this presentation today, and thanks to everybody who's joining. After giving a short introduction on the topic, I will provide a brief overview of the concept of diaspora and its recent developments, followed by a brief overview of the MENA region, including major migration patterns. But the main part of this presentation will deal with findings from two studies, the first one looking at Tunisian diaspora groups, and the second one at Syrian diaspora groups in Germany. After a comparison of these two cases, I will derive more general conclusions for the analysis of diaspora groups in fragile settings. So it was in 2010 when the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia led to protests, uprisings, and revolutions in the Arab world, changing the landscape of many countries in the region, where the grassroots movements overthrew long-ruling dictators, both peacefully and violently. It also led to Islamist secular divide, conflict, and civil war, as well as to economic and political uncertainty. By now, however, little attention has been paid in how far the Arab Spring impacted the diaspora of the respective countries. But as I will show later, the uprisings not only influenced societies in the country of origin, but also those living abroad. In general, there is agreement that diasporas have increasingly become a significant place in the international arena. But there is a growing debate on the nature and impact on diaspora engagement in conflict settings. So on the one hand, as agents of change, diaspora groups can promote peace and development in the country of origin through economic and social remittances. And the nationalists who can exacerbate the dynamics of conflicts, and thus are seen as security risk for both the country of origin and the country of destination. However, there is recently a development in academia to move beyond this dichotomy of diasporas being either peacebreakers or peacemakers by analyzing the diverse role of diaspora groups in conflicts and the factors shaping transnational mobilization. And this is also closely related to a shift of the concept of diaspora. So actually, the traditional definition included three main features of diaspora. They were perceived as formed by forcible or voluntary dispersion of a people to a number of countries. They would constitute a diaspora if they continue to evince a common concern for their homeland, which could be sometimes an imagined homeland, and come to share a common fate with their own people wherever they happen to be, often referred to as group consciousness or collective identity. However, conceptually, there's been a shift away from seeing diaspora as natural results of migration. Then this would imply fixed and homogeneous identities, values, and practice. So newer concepts, which I call the more constructionist approach, are moving beyond essentialist conceptions of identity, culture, and belonging, and focus on the process of social construction that influence the formation of a diaspora, and emphasize the broader transnational context in which the formation takes place. So in this concept, not every migrant who feels connected to the homeland and shares a common identity with others should be considered as part of the diaspora, but only those who are mobilized to engage in the homeland political process. If we then recognize diaspora engagement as multidimensional, diverse, and multi-layered, there's also a need to understand the different factors by which engagement is shaped. So I use this kind of analytical framework to look at different levels where factors influence the form and also areas of engagement. So, for example, looking at the agency level, factors such as age, gender, and socioeconomic characteristics influence the capacity of individuals, so what people are able to do. So it's often mentioned that people who have higher education and higher incomes are more likely to participate in actions of diaspora. But more importantly, there needs also to be a willingness or aspiration to take action and shape the development of the country of origin. So it's the combination of desire and capacity which actually motivates people to get involved. Looking at the diaspora groups and the process of mobilization and collective action, the dimension nature of diaspora mobilization often depends on the size, composition, and distribution of diaspora groups, as well as on the ability of diaspora organizations to generate and maintain a common identity. However, and I think it's also important in this topic, diaspora groups are seldom unified and homogeneous, so there's a need to understand the different aspirations and institutions of diaspora groups, as well as the underlying factors such, for example, as class, profession, political affiliation, but also ethnic and gendered hierarchies that create fragmentation, power relations, and competition among the different groups. Looking at the structure, it is emphasized that the transnational political opportunity structure, which refers to opportunities and constraints in the country of destination, the country of origin, and the transnational sphere, influence what actually diaspora groups can and cannot do. So diaspora groups often do not act in a political vacuum, and therefore the measures they implement and the strategies they choose often match with the destination country's policies and broader public opinion. While these might be favorable for some groups, they can be also constraining for others. So it has always be analyzed in a specific context. Therefore, transnational political opportunity structures explain why the success of diaspora groups in one homeland continent often vary over time and place. But similar, also diaspora policies of the country of origin might enable or constrain engagement, and they might sometimes not appeal to the diaspora as a whole, but rather favor specific fractions or subgroups, so therefore creating an environment of inclusion and exclusion for particular groups. So beside policies, and I also think this is very important in this case, in the case of Syrian and Tunisian diaspora, critical and social and political events such as revolutionary struggles, conflict, and natural disaster can shape the diaspora consciousness and mobilize members to take action. And again, this highlights that the fact of diaspora engagement should always be analyzed in a specific historical context. Talking about context, I will now talk really briefly about the Mena region. So, as I think everybody knows, the Mena region is characterized by great diversity in terms of economic, political, and social development. So we have this violent conflicts in Syria and Iraq and Libya and Yemen, spillovers to the neighboring countries such as Jordan and Lebanon, and also somehow challenging political transitions in Tunisia and Egypt. On the other hand, we have growth in macroeconomic stability in oil-rich countries. Similar to the diversity of the regional patterns of development, this diversity is also reflected in migration patterns of the region. So it was estimated that 19 million migrants originated from the Mena region in 2013 and are now living abroad. But the region includes migrant sending, receiving, and transit countries, and also, as mentioned before, have different patterns of migration across the countries. So, for example, looking at migration from the MENA region to OECD countries, migration from the Maghreb countries is strongly concentrated toward continental Europe, while that from other MENA countries is focused on the group of Anglo-Saxon countries. Similar, also the skill composition varies between receiving countries. So migrants from the MENA region are much more educated on average in Anglo-Saxon destination countries than in the traditional destination countries of continental Europe. So overall, we can say that it's quite diverse, especially regarding origin country, but also destination country. And the only thing we can say actually that there's a growing trend of migration within the region and that the overall level of education of the migrants is increasing. But given this heterogeneity and diversity, along with the context-specific nature of diaspora engagement, I think it's not feasible to actually make general conclusion on diaspora engagement in the MENA region, and therefore I focused, and which I will present as well here, on two cases, the Tunisian and Syrian diaspora groups, also just in Germany, to provide a deeper understanding of the dynamics and processes of diaspora engagement in fragile settings or in transition country settings. So before I present the findings, I will just give a background of the studies. In the case of Tunisia, the study was commissioned by the GLZ, the German Development Cooperation, in 2013. And the aim was actually to map Tunisian diaspora groups in Germany and to identify potential for constructive cooperation with GLZ and other development actors. In the case of Syria, this is part of my PhD project, where I focus on collective action and transnational engagement of Syrian diaspora groups. I started this research in 2012, but now actually in the autumn, we'll also conduct additional interviews. I always use the qualitative approach in both studies, and including participant observation, in-depth interviews with members of diaspora organizations mainly, and stakeholder interviews. Sorry. Coming now to the case of Tunisia. I will briefly provide a country context and also a bit of Tunisian immigration to Germany to understand the composition of the diaspora group and the context of the country of origin. So the spirit of the Arab Spring actually reached Tunisia or started in Tunisia in 2010, at the end of 2010 and 2011. And Tunisia has been hailed as a model of democratic transition since these uprisings, and has escaped the worst of the region's violence. It's had free elections and fair elections. Its political process has been inclusive, and religious and secular parties are in the government together. However, transition is still challenging due to unstable social, political, and economic conditions, and there are also concerns regarding the security situation due to terrorist attacks in March and June this year. Looking at Tunisian immigration to Germany, Germany is an important destination country, is also historically due to the signing of labor recruitment agreement with Tunisia in 1965. In 2014, the number of Tunisians were estimated at 28,000 regarding the German federal statistics, and regarding the Tunisian statistics, 86,000. So, however, the German statistics do not include Tunisians who are naturalized. On the other hand, also the Tunisian statistics sometimes count the persons double, or it's also not really reliable. So we can consider that the number is in between these two numbers. What we also see that there are not really a lot of socioeconomic statistics, but the Tunisian immigrant population in Germany is perceived to be made up by predominantly young male migrants with lower to mid levels of education. However, there is also an increase in trend towards migration for a reason of education. Looking now at the Tunisian diaspora groups in Germany, we can actually say that the revolution has changed the landscape of Tunisian diaspora organizations. So the spirit of the Arab Spring not only influenced Tunisian society in the country of origin, but also Tunisians living abroad. There was a new consciousness, especially among the younger generation, with a strong sense of belonging and connectedness to Tunisia. And also, while historically a major focus of the Tunisian diaspora organizations in Germany has been on integration, the revolution has activated many Tunisians and shifted the focus towards developmental activities. So what also changed somehow is the number of organizations. So before there were a lot of organizations active. However, some ceased their engagement after the political transition, whereas others, due to the revolution, started to be actively engaged and created new forms of organization. In general, there are 4 types of organization. The cultural associations were established mainly by the guest worker generation between the 1960s and 1990s. The aim was to support and strengthen the relationship between Tunisians living in Germany, promote their integration, and strengthen their ties to the country of origin. According to many respondents, however, some of these organizations were also supported by the former government under Ben Ali, and sometimes served as an extended arm of the Tunisian regime in order to influence Tunisians living, but as well also controlling Tunisians living abroad. So this is also maybe one reason why some organizations stopped their engagement after the political transition. Besides this traditional association, also there were new organizations established. These were mainly religious associations aiming to promote social, cultural, and religious activities in the Tunisian community. A second category of organizations are the academic and students associations. The majority of them were also have also long history and were established mainly in the 1990s by the highly skilled migrants in Germany. The main aims are to support Tunisian students in Germany, to enable technological transfer to Tunisia, and to support a long-term cooperation between industry and academic institutions in Tunisia and Germany. These organizations are quite large and presenting a high number of members. And also besides students, alumni are also active in these networks. Beside these 2 types of organization, there are business and professional organizations as well as social and political organizations. These mainly developed during the revolution. So the business and professional organizations, similar to the academic and student associations, aim to promote economic development of Tunisian by pooling the expertise of Tunisians abroad and by promoting investment in Tunisia. And these social and political organizations, however, I group them in one category, but they are quite heterogeneous. So they developed also during the revolution, and they also wanted to support the main objective of the revolution, namely, among other things, freedom, human rights, the fight against corruption, as well as social and economic development. As I said, they are quite distinct in their characteristics. For example, one was a humanitarian organization, another was an advocacy organization, another was a public policy network, which was also quite linked to the new government in Tunisia after the revolution, and another was a development organization aiming to promote general development more in general. The areas of involvement can also be somehow divided into 4 areas. So first of all, organizations emphasize that they seek to promote integration through to the provision of consultancy and training opportunities for Tunisians in Germany to enhance their skills. Moreover, organizations see their role as bridge builders by enabling mutual understanding and intercultural exchange between Tunisians and Germans, but also wanted to raise awareness of the current situation at this time in Tunisia. So they felt also that the media wasn't really representing the developments in Tunisia correctly. So they also organized information campaigns to raise awareness in the broader public in Germany. However, the majority of respondents say that the promotion of knowledge transfer and economic investment is seen as crucial for sustainable development of Tunisia. So actually, also the majority of activities were implemented in this field and were directed towards promoting economic and knowledge transfer by fostering networking between Tunisian professionals, students, and academics through the organization of trade fairs, information sessions, and conferences. Some organizations also implemented projects in Tunisia, including community programs such as building of schools to improve the life of those living in Tunisia. Microfinance programs were implemented to promote entrepreneurship. Here there was a focus on the younger generation, but also women. And there was also one organization providing humanitarian aid, in particular to Tunisians returning from Libya during the outbreak of the crisis there. So actually both the Tunisian diaspora as well as the German development actors I spoke to saw many potentials for constructive cooperation, such as the involvement of diaspora groups in consultancy work or stronger involvement of the Tunisian diaspora in the political process, both in Germany and in Tunisia. Regarding the development of Tunisia, promoting temporary return, entrepreneurship, and development activities of diaspora organizations were seen as very important measurements to strengthen the development potential of diaspora groups. However, there were also some factors influencing the engagement, both positively and but also negatively. So actually everybody I talked to mentioned that the low capacity, including lack of time, manpower, and financial resources, was in combination of a lack of information on opportunities for cooperation, were seen as the major constraining factors for engagement. So everybody I interviewed were engaged on voluntary basis next to their jobs and family obligation. And also the financial resources mainly came from membership fees and donations. So there were actually really just smaller programs which are financed by, for example, the German municipality or German NGOs. Besides this lack of resources, there was also somehow a lack of trust among the different diaspora organizations. So even so, everybody said that the revolution brought the Tunisians more together. Many respondents felt that there's still a lot of mistrust and missing communication between the different groups, even though actually cooperation was perceived as very important. Regarding the political opportunity structure in Tunisia, it provided also both constraints and challenges and opportunities. So on the one hand, there was the spirit of optimism and motivation to shape the future of Tunisia, and equipped with qualification, skills, and knowledge, the diaspora really aimed to contribute to a positive change in the Tunisia. So they had this kind of motivation. But on the other hand, this process of transformation also hindered this engagement. For example, political instability due to constantly changing authorities, as well as bureaucracy and corruption, often discouraged actually people to get really involved in Tunisia. The political opportunity structure in Germany was actually perceived as quite positive, because there was actually an increasing interest in cooperating with Tunisian diaspora groups since the revolution. So it also put the focus of the development actors more to this group. So now I will come to the Syrian case. Syria, during the past 4 years, the Syrian uprising escalated into one of the world's bloodiest conflicts, causing well over 150 deaths, displaced more than 11.5 million people, left 12.2 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, and deepened sectarian violence across the region. There are several regional battlefronts in the country, with a great number of armed actors affiliated to different fractions and with complex and fluid relationships between the different rebel groups, giving this conflict a really highly complex nature. With regard to Syrian immigration to Germany, Germany is Europe's largest receiving country of Syrian migrants, hosting in total around 120,000 individuals with Syrian citizenship. And there is also a huge group actually of new arrived refugees now, which make up this, which will increase this number. Unfortunately, again, there's not a lot of socioeconomic statistics available for the Syrian immigrants, but statistics indicate that Syrians in OECD countries have an intermediate skill level and half of the population is employed in highly skilled jobs. And also from my interviews, I got this perception that there are a huge group of actually highly skilled Syrians living in Germany. Looking now at the Syrian diaspora groups, I want again to highlight that these findings are mainly based on interviews conducted in 2012 and 2013, and therefore they reflect really the situation more at the beginning of the conflict. And as I will address later, developments in the country of origin are also somehow now reflected in the diaspora, but I will come to this later. So actually, the Syrian diaspora is characterized by heterogeneity in terms of religion, ethnicity, and political aspiration, which reflects somehow the heterogeneity within the Syrian society. And what almost everybody participant mentioned in the study, that is that the diaspora and its consciousness actually developed through the revolution. So the uprising in Syria created somehow more open space for engagement also within the diaspora. And many actually acknowledged that before the attitude toward the others was often marked by mistrust and dissociation. And this was mainly due to the heritage of depression and which resulted in depoliticization of the Syrian society, but also the depoliticization of the Syrian diaspora. But also the depression of the regime was also present in the Syrian diaspora and was carried further by the Syrian Secret Service operations of the Syrian government in Germany. So actually before, really people didn't feel that they are able to discuss political issues openly also in Germany. However, when they saw the people going on the street in Syria, they also mobilized and went on the streets in Germany, met on the demonstrations, discussed and shared their opinion, often for the first time actually in Germany. So during that time, several initiatives were formed to support the Syrian revolution in Germany. The political groups included all directions from left and liberal, democratic up to the right, such as liberal Islamists. And also, many Syrian respondents argued that the revolution had brought the Syrians more together and they overcame religious and ethnic boundaries. So, interesting, it was not due to ethnicity, religion, or political similarity, but it was somehow the uprising which united the people. However, the revolution not unified the diaspora as a whole, but rather created two kind of fractions. So those being in favor of the regime and those being against the regime. And also these findings may be from interviews of members being against the regime, so part of the opposition. So the activities ranged from the economic to the political to the social sphere. But economic contributions in form of collective remittances to support those in need in Syria and in the refugees camp was seen as very important, since to ensure the livelihood of those suffering the consequence of the conflict. When funds were provided to as resources for political action, those were used to finance, for example, local coordination committees and the peaceful protests. So, but actually, no, everybody said that they never wanted and won't do it in the future, finance armed groups. In the political sphere, raising awareness among the German society and lobbying against the regime represented the main activities of the Syrian diaspora. So So everybody stated that they carried out information campaigns or events that seek to mobilize broader German society and to inform about the current situation in Syria, and this is still done. Also, demonstrations were organized in German cities. In addition, social media such as Facebook and Twitter were used to provide background information and coverage in form of print material, photographs, and videos. Lobbying took place also with local authorities in Germany, but also they went to the federal office to actually demand a standpoint of the German government in this conflict. I couldn't observe a lot of direct participation, for example, in political groups. Only few stated that they were actively engaged in oppositional groups such as the Syrian National Council and the National Coordination Body of Democratic Change, which, however, now changed again. So this is also in development. In the social sphere, through their extended networks in Syria, the diaspora organization bridged the relief aid with the persons in need and therefore provided access to otherwise inaccessible areas. The aid included, among other things, money, clothes, medicine, and medical equipment. And actually, all these organizations cooperated with local coordination committees and local NGOs, and therefore had direct contact to the persons in need. And I think especially this access in the Syrian country is the main advantage of Syrian diaspora groups being engaged in humanitarian aid. And actually the majority in the social fields of project were conducted in form of humanitarian aid. There were just minor legal and media workshops conducted with activists in the neighboring countries. But a lot of people emphasize that they think that the role of civil society or promoting civil society in the future will be important in order to deal with the consequences of the conflict. However, at this stage of the conflict, providing support for the victims and appeal to the international community seems to be the essential aim of the organizations. The factors influencing engagement in the Syrian case, it's on the one hand quite similar to the things in the Tunisian case. So everything was done on a voluntary basis. So it was again a low capacity of organization, the lack of time, manpower, and the financial resources, which played a major role. By now, there are some organizations actually financed by the federal office, German federal office. However, I mean, in general, there's really lack of structural funds for this organization. And also the capacity of the people, since they are engaged now over 4 years, and the conflict won't stop that soon. They also feel quite exhausted. This is also seen due to the somehow psychological consequences of the conflicts, which are also felt in the diaspora as like a traumatization, because they are confronted with this conflict every day. So this also led to a lot of frustration, in particular because they felt that the German government and the international community actually didn't provide a lot of support. So they felt actually that they activity they're doing not really changing the situation. And even though the German government actually supported from the beginning the opposition, but I think but many respondents actually mentioned that it was not a lot of, for example, financial support or taking their voice serious in the government. And lately, I think, which is also one of the very important point, that the conflict stage influenced the area of engagement and forms of cooperation. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was a lot of engagement also in the political sphere, such as lobbying, raising awareness. But now a lot, or the majority of organizations really focus on humanitarian aid. This is due to the need of the Syrian people, but also forms of cooperation somehow got more difficult. So for example, where it was emphasized always at the beginning that the Syrians feel united and their religion and ethnicity doesn't play a role, we actually see that the increased ethnicization and sectarianism of the conflict in the country of origin Related also to decreased resources from, for example, due to decrease in donations, maybe also membership fees, actually increases somehow competition, creates power dynamics and further fragmentation. However, what I want to emphasize is there seems to be more ethnicization than before, but this ethnicization within the diaspora is rather a consequence than the cause of a conflict. So looking now at this two cases in comparison, we see actually that the uprising, the political change, not only influences society in the country of origin, but also the members of diasporas. So, and that they face actually similar opportunities and constraints in the country of destination. For example, I think that the more open political opportunity structure in the country of origin actually, with the spirit of change and revolution, really activated people to get involved. However, again, the lack of resources are actually being a huge burden for a lot of organizations. And I think this is also why you see it now also more decreasing engagement. Looking at the difference, of course, we have totally different developments in the country of origin that are also reflected in the diaspora groups. So more of the composition of immigrant population differ greatly. For example, Tunisian immigrants, due to also the more homogeneous society in Tunisia, are more homogeneous when it comes in terms of ethnicity and religion compared to the Syrian immigrant population. But there are also variations along knowledge and skill. For instance, there are many economic and engineering Tunisian students, and there are a lot of also now this younger generation, the student and academic association pointed to the importance of development or promoting economic development in Tunisia. On the other hand, we have a lot of Syrian doctors in Germany, and they are heavily involved in providing humanitarian aid. But I think it's both a combination of the immigrant population, but also the developments in the country of origin, which shape the forms of engagement. And so to come to the conclusion, we saw actually that even though we put this MENA region under one umbrella, we see that this engagement was quite diverse. There were different groups. And but we also saw that engagement wasn't a natural result just of migration, but that it was somehow a process of social construction. But what I want to emphasize, I think we should see diaspora engagement as diverse, multi-layered and multi-dimensional and shaped by the different contextual factors. And I do think that the developments in the country of origin are also really important, since somehow they are sometimes also reflected in the diaspora. So, so we should look at diaspora strategies and actions of diaspora groups. We shouldn't perceive them as fixed, but rather as a dynamic process, which is dynamic in time and space, which I highlighted. So I presented you the findings from the Tunisian case from interviews in 2012, 2013. But due to this newer developments, we also see really that the strategies, but also forms of cooperation and areas of engagement changed. And I also want to highlight that I think we shouldn't just analyze diaspora groups and their source of network identity along ethnic and religious line, which is often done in, for example, migration research, but we should also look, for example, at gender, professional networks and political affiliation, because I do also think that political affiliation often is quite diverse among diaspora groups. So this is actually was my conclusion. I thank you very much for joining this seminar, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Nora, thank you so much for the presentation. And I think you're totally right that diaspora engagement is diverse, multi-layered, and really depends on contextual factors. But at the same time, you really drew out some similarities that we see not just among diaspora groups in MENA regions, but just among all of IDEA's membership, which is global, some of those points you made about resources, capacity, and all of that. And that's one reason why we try to do this series, to allow people the space to learn from other examples and also to sort of build up their ability to achieve their mission. So thank you so much. There are a few questions that I'll just go through and see if we can get you to answer. So the first is a question from Morocco, actually. Do you have information on diaspora engagement, both with groups who are outside of the countries and efforts from within the country to reach out to diaspora prior to the conflicts? They want to know because they're thinking that pre-conflict engagement should be more constructed in a development vision, so that post-conflict you can build on what's been set, what's happened before conflict has come.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a really interesting point. Unfortunately, in both cases, there's not a lot of information before the conflict or the uprising in the Tunisian case. So what exists is actually a study, and it's similar actually to, or has similar findings than my study conducted after the revolution on Tunisian diaspora groups in Germany. And there was also quite a lot of emphasis on promoting economic and development and knowledge transfer. On the Syrian diaspora, there's actually really nothing out there. So unfortunately, I think it would have been really interesting, but I also think that the attention from research, but also governments, just recently emerged in this regarding these groups actually. And this, I think it might be the case for a lot of other MENA region diaspora groups.
Thank you. And maybe we can send the link out to the pre-Tunisia study that you're talking about.
Of course.
Another question from Jordanian diaspora. Can you elaborate on cultural remittances as opposed to financial remittances?
In general, or with regard to the studies?
See if we can get a follow-up. Both is the answer.
Both, okay. Thanks for making this contribution. I think I do actually like the concept of social and cultural remittances, because it's also emphasis that it's not economic transfers, but also maybe cultural transfers or social transfers, which somehow can create a change in the society in the country of origin. However, what I feel that at least from an academic point of view, the concepts often focus on a one-way direction of, for example, cultural remittances from the country of residence to the country of origin. But what I found actually quite interesting, for example, now in the Syrian case, actually everybody said that they used the words or this objectives of the revolution movement in Syria and said, okay, we also now fight for democracy, we also fight for freedoms and human rights, but it actually was somehow reversed remittances. So it came actually, so the movement started in Syria, and then the Syrian diaspora got activated. But of course, I also felt, and I see maybe here a role of the diaspora, depending on the development, also different groups take, but I can see it maybe in the future of Syria, because even though you see also somehow ethnicization within the diaspora, but it's not that strong that maybe it is compared to this in the Syrian country, where you really directly the consequences of the conflict. But I think regarding cultural remittances, I do think it's important to also look at both sides, so also reverse that remittances, because I think it's also somehow influencing the way, so for example, movements in the country of origin can also influence the way the diaspora thinks. And I think also in the case of Tunisia, for example, this more political engagement, but they were allowed to vote in the government after the transition for the first time. They also, sorry, do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. But they also were voting for the quite conservative parties. So I wouldn't say that per se diaspora groups always transfer good cultural remittances, if you could say good or bad. I mean, this is also a quite normative discussion I found in this field.
Right. Thank you. And another question from DC is, can you provide an example of a best-in-class diaspora organization you've seen in your studies of the Middle East?
A best practice?
Yeah, or an organization or two who you thought were doing stellar work that you could share with us as an example.
Okay, no, I do think that actually a lot of organizations did great jobs, and in particular, given the developments in the country of origin. I do think that, for example, in the German case, there were also attempts to build somehow an umbrella, or to establish an umbrella organization unifying all the different groups, which is not, it has been done, but it's really not really been successful. So actually all the groups are more decentralized and work on their own activities, but there is not a lot of really joint engagement in the Syrian case now, which would actually maybe also facilitate that the organization get more professional. But there are some organizations which which actually also, in particular regarding this conflict in Syria, really try to stay impartial, try to really serve all the Syrians, and I do think they are quite successful. It's the German Syrian doctors, for example, which are also collaborating with the German government. Yeah, this I think are some, but I mean, I do think that the work of every organization is quite good, but compared, for example, to Syrian organizations in the UK, the Germans haven't been that much able to really professionalize. This is also due to, for example, financial constraints, and that engagement is done on just voluntary basis.
Right. Thank you. The next question is, what do you see as the future for diaspora engagement in the Middle East? And are there any particular sectors or issues that you think are really ripe for diaspora participation?
I do think they are, of course, but I do think it's really context specific. So, for example, in the Tunisian case, I think they are quite successful in really creating this kind of connections also between academic institutions in Germany and academic institutions in Tunisia. They are also trying, at least in cooperation with the German government, really to create this kind of business opportunities. In the Syrian case, of course, for now, I think it is important to provide humanitarian aid, and specifically because Syrians, both in the UK but also in Germany, have this kind of networks because they are often doctors, but also those who are not doctors engage in humanitarian aid were quite successful really in getting also access and connection with the local communities in Syria. So I do think it's really important, but it depends, of course, on the context. So, but I also think, for example, that in the Syrian case, a lot of attention is put on the humanitarian aid, but I do actually also think that political involvement of diaspora groups is also important, because I mean, you can't really build up a country with just humanitarian aid. So I think, and also important engagement would be, for example, promoting civil society, but also in the reconstruction, also economic programs. So I do think it really depends on the country, on the development within the country, but also on the different skills of diaspora groups within the destination country.
Mm-hmm. And for Tunisia, and you mentioned business opportunities, is that more along the lines of foreign direct investment in Tunisia, or do you mean supporting entrepreneurs, or combination?
Yeah, it depends. What I saw when I presented the Tunisian findings actually to groups of Tunisians, but also Germans, there was a conference organized actually by one diaspora group where I presented them these findings. And I talked about, for example, that Tunisians feel that there is this political instability really doesn't create room for an engagement, direct engagement in Tunisia, because everything was too uncertain. But then there was one person who is from the private sector in Tunisia, and he actually mentioned, yeah, but we, the private sector, we really would love to be to cooperate with the Tunisian diaspora. And I think there is a lot of potential, actually, that the diaspora groups who are also willing to be engaged in this area find also reliable partners there. So it could be through investment, but it could also to small microfinance entrepreneurship programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then we have a question from Dublin that's more about your research methods. So could you explain more about your approach, as you mentioned, qualitative, I guess your qualitative approach, and the criteria that you used to implement the approach?
So for me, when I started with the Syrian diaspora, as I said, there was nothing out there. So actually, I really started with a mapping of the organizations I could find. So I started with an internet search, but I also searched in the Registry of Commerce in Germany and actually mapped all the organizations which I could find. But then, of course, there was a lot of organizations also registered in the Syrian case, like which were somehow also kind of cultural associations, but which, when I tried to contact them via phone, weren't really active anymore. So I had this mapping and I cleaned this mapping, and from this organization, I actually really tried to contact everybody. Besides this, I also used snowball sampling. And at the beginning, also the Syrians mentioned that they were really quite connected also in across different cities, which is also now really decreasing. But at the beginning, there was this kind of network. So I also used snowball sampling. And as a third way, I made somehow participant observations. So I went to protest, demonstration, information campaigns, and then also were talking to people there. However, what I really have to acknowledge, and this was quite difficult, and I hope also now with more time to also reach different groups, because in the Syrian case, as I said, it's mainly between those who were, at the beginning at least, those who were in favor of the regime and those who were against the regime. And the opposition, because also the public opinion and the public policy in Germany was more favoring the opposition also was more visible. Whereas I also tried to actually contact people, organizations, which might have been, which also said that they were more in favor of the regime, but that was really difficult to conduct interviews. So I think this has to be, of course, taken into account for this method, regarding this method. And in Tunisia, it was a similar approach. I also somehow mapped all the organization. I tried to contact them all. And and then I used snowball sampling, and also I went to information campaigns.
Excellent, thank you. And just give it a couple more seconds to see if anyone has any last-minute questions. But I wonder, Nora, are there any lessons you would expand broader? I mean, I know you made the strong point that diaspora engagement is very diverse and depends on contextual factors. But are there any lessons that you would expand to other countries or regions in the Middle East or North Africa from what you found in your research?
Yeah, as you mentioned, first of all, when I explained the constraining factors, I think it is somehow a big ambiguity of governments that they really want to have the diaspora engaged, for example, looking now, for example, as receiving country governments. But at the same time, it's really difficult if you don't get the structural funds. So I do think that having a more sustainable funding also of organizations is very important in order to promote actually diaspora engagement. Mm-hmm. I also think that there is this tension between the diaspora has to be impartial in order to engage in the development process, or especially in conflict settings, which is often abandoned by governments. But on the other hand, they are of course somehow actors in the conflict, even though they would try to be impartial, but still you have this emotional connections. And I do think in the Syrian case, with regards to, for example, or which I could think of, which would be also relevant for other conflict setting, that actually, especially when you look at sources of finance, saying diaspora groups, it's really often have a lot of criteria which these groups often can't really fulfill, because, for example, they also have often to show transparency and accountability, but on the other hand, in a conflict setting, it's really quite difficult to show where the money goes to, even though it would be really important, but still you can't really go through official channels, for example, to sending remittances or humanitarian aid. So I do think this kind of funding issues, I do think that they are quite similar for other countries as well. And what also is similar, I think that the developments in the country of origin, we saw it also in other cases, that they actually inspired this renewed interest of groups.
Excellent.
Yeah,
and
I think.
Thank you. And we just have 1 minute left, and this is the last question.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations for overcoming the Syrian diaspora polarization and developing cultural diversity?
I do think, for example, that in different countries it's not that problematic. For example, at least what I heard, and as I said, I haven't done research in the UK, but what I at least heard in the UK, that they are much more cooperating together. And this could have, different factors could influence this. For example, it could be that they are also more centralized, so being in London or Manchester, so that there isn't a huge geographical distance, but it could also be that the financial structure which is provided by the UK or other international organizations in the UK might be different. So I do think, and I think there are also initiatives from the German government to still promote cooperation between the organization. And I think also it's a natural process, because I do believe that, there is still a willingness to cooperate, but of course, it is a quite difficult context. But I think it's also difficult because people never openly discussed their opinion or political opinion or opinion on a country. So actually, of course, you have to also build somehow these norms for cooperation. And maybe, and I hope actually that if you also promote as a government this kind of cooperation, which I think the German government also tries to do, because they also finance somehow, not finance the establishment of the umbrella organization, but they help with capacity workshops. So I do think there's a willingness, and yeah, I hope just that in the end, I think it's also due to development in the country of origin. So I do think that, yeah, I hope it can be done, but it's also a difficult situation, I think.
Thank you very much. And we're just at 1 o'clock. So Nora, I'm going to say thank you again so much for joining us and for sharing your research findings. I think it's been extremely valuable to this group, and I see people are sending a lot of thanks in the chat box, so I know that our members really appreciated it. For everyone, we'll be sending out the recording and slides later this week, so stay tuned. You'll find that in your email. Nora, thank you again so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was really nice to discovering this with you all. So yeah, have a nice day as well.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.